Hello, my name's Iain Livingstone. I've been in the games industry for 45 years. I've been privileged to help many games companies and organisations grow in the UK. I'm proud to be a patron of this remarkable place, the National Video Game Museum, which is run by the charity I helped to found, the BGI. This museum celebrates video games and preserves our games cultural heritage. Here, we educate tens of thousands of people about what games mean and how they're made, offering playable exhibits and workshops to UK schools and the public. We are immensely proud to run one of the most interactive museums in the country, but we have a duty of care to our visitors and staff during the current coronavirus outbreak. Coronavirus threatens its very existence. As a new charity, we have no safety net of public funding to weather the storm. Whilst we have support from some patrons and companies, without visitors, the museum is in grave danger. If you care about video games, please donate in any way you can using the link below. Thank you.
Hello, can anybody hear me? Is this stream working okay? If anybody's in the comments and they can hear me, please do let me know, just so I can make sure that this is working okay. But anyway, I'll carry on. Hello Elmo. Hello Dog Girl, aka Gina. Hello Gina. You've never been to NVM since it opened. I'm so ashamed. Don't worry about it. It's fine. That's not a problem. We hear you. Awesome. Sweet. Well, welcome to Love Video Games. This is a show. This is about celebrating our love for video games and is all about video game culture and the Video Game Museum. But who am I and why am I wearing a hat when it's clearly quite warm outside and you don't need to be wearing a hat? Well, I am Connor Clark and I am the marketing and communications person here at the museum in Sheffield. And like many of us, I have not been able to get my hair cut in the past few weeks because I have been at home and not been going to the museum. And unfortunately, I'm not brave enough to cut it myself. So that's me. And what is this show then? And kind of why are we doing it? Why are we doing this show? Well, essentially, it's because now it's freezing. It's not too bad. But essentially, we at the museum have been missing you. And by you, we mean the thousands of you that used to visit our museum every Friday, Saturday and Sunday. So we thought that whilst everyone is locked down, that we would bring the museum to you. And what better platform to do that than Twitch, the gaming platform, right? The gaming streaming platform. So we are going to be kind of live streaming to you every week about various different things all around kind of video game culture. And it will include some special guests and it's going to have some really cool little features as well that we've got coming up. But do remember that this is a two-way conversation. I'm the one who's kind of speaking into the camera right now, but please do kind of comment and below and ask any questions you might like to. I can see all your comments and I will try and respond to them as much as possible. Also, we will have some kind of, like I said, special guests coming up. So if you have any questions for them, also put them in the comments. Okay, so how does this show work? This Love Video Games, how is it going to work? Well, for today's show, first thing I'm going to do is give you a virtual tour of the museum. Unfortunately, I'm not able to go to the museum in person to do that for you. I'm not able to actually walk you around with a video camera. A couple of reasons for that. One, I am staying at home and I am saving lives. You know, we shouldn't really be leaving the house unless it's kind of absolutely necessary or urgent. But two, when this kind of all happened, all this situation, we actually did go to the museum and we put a lot of the games into hibernation and we've kind of packed them away. So even if I did take you there, there's not too much to see at the moment, or at least not as much as it would have been when it was open. So instead, what I have done is I've been able to grab a few photos and kind of some short little videos of the museum, and I can kind of walk you through it and show you what it's like, as well as talking you through how the exhibits are made and what we do. Cool. Like I said, I will be keeping an eye on the comments. Elmo, I just noticed, she said if you work for a company just like the MVM that was born in Nottingham. That's right. There's now opened an office in Sheffield up the road from the MVM. Fantastic. Ace. Obviously, the museum traces its heritage back to Nottingham as well. So we have very strong connections in Nottingham, and we love Nottingham a lot. Okay. So, after I do this tour with you, the quick virtual tour, it's probably going to be about 20-30 minutes. Then we have a pre-recorded presentation with from our resident academic video game preservation expert at the museum. And his name is Dr. James Newman. So Dr. Newman is a professor at Bath Spa University and is one of our very trusted advisors and one of the kind of leading academics in game preservation. So James's presentation is going to be about what we consider a video game to be, and how the changing definitions of video games make it very tricky to fully preserve games culture. And then, finally, to kind of round off the show, we will also be having a live interview with Iain Simons, who is the Director of Culture at the National Video Game Museum, and someone who has been at the heart of UK video game culture for the last 15 years. So we are going to be chatting to him about his festival, the Game City Festival, which started in 2006 down in Nottingham, and how that has grown into what is now the National Video Game Museum in Sheffield. If you do have any questions for Iain about kind of anything he might have done in his career, please do kind of put them in the comments. I'll try and remember them. However, you might also want to hang on to them and wait until we do the interview and comment them then, just in case I forget. Okay, so on with this part here, which is our kind of our virtual tour. So like I said, I can't give you a physical tour around the space, but I can kind of perhaps take you through some photos and talk to you a bit about what the museum is and our kind of history. So our museum, the National Video Game Museum, opened in November 2018, so about 18 months ago, which makes it practically still a baby in museum terms, but that's kind of fitting because most of our collection is practically brand new compared to a lot of museums too. We're aware that we're not kind of housing fossils that have been dug up from an archaeological dig somewhere. However, I should make it clear, we do have a copy of Atari's E.T., which was dug up from a desert somewhere, so we do kind of have a fossil there. But rather, our collection, obviously, as it's still kind of quite new, is about interpreting and showcasing popular culture and shared culture that's of video games. Okay? So, of course, that doesn't mean we're not going to be talking about a bunch of old video game stuff. We do have a lot of that as well. So anyway, if you were to come to the venue in Sheffield, the first thing that you would do is you'd kind of walk in this big kind of door here that you can just see just up there, and you'd walk into this big grey corridor. There's a little video, it's not really a video, of what our gold corridor is. So you will know that you will find yourself in Sheffield, which is in South Yorkshire, and actually the museum itself and this corridor is bang splat in the middle of Sheffield too. It's based in the huge Castle House building. Yes, Gina, Pong. We can definitely talk about Pong. We can actually talk about the game that preceded Pong as well, and I'll show you that in a minute. So we're based in the Castle House building, which is in the city centre, and that building used to be a massive co-op, and often people who live in Sheffield know it as the old co-op building. But now it's kind of been housed by a bunch of tech organisations and smaller tech organisations. So directly above us there are One Disco, which are a huge Sheffield and California tech company. We also have Collider, we've got Barclays Eagle Labs upstairs as well, and even got a bunch of different and smaller game companies too. Our big space, the museum, is primarily on the first floor, and you kind of enter it by going straight up this corridor here. It's worth noting that our museum is entirely wheelchair friendly. There are no steps whatsoever. A key part of what we want to do at the museum is around accessibility. So having kind of no steps and a wheelchair friendly place is quite important to us. So when you walk up this ramp, Am I right in saying it's next to Commune? Yes, we're actually directly above Commune, but you enter Commune from down the hill. So you have to go kind of down the hill, and you've got obviously the big glass, the really beautiful glass front of Commune. But if you walk up the hill, then we're just on the left. The way it works is that Commune is there, and we are directly above it, but you have to walk in through a different entrance. I like that the Castle House building has come back to life. It was empty for a long time. It was. The whole area is coming back to life, actually. There's a big regeneration project in Castlegate that we're really kind of proud to be a part of. There's a bunch of different kind of organisations popped up there, and a lot of gaming organisations too. So, next door to us, we kind of have Meltdown Gaming Bar and Extra Life Gaming Lounge, which is like a small little gaming cafe as well, all literally within 2 meters of us. It's become quite a little gaming quarter. So, anyway, where were we with the tour? So you walk up this corridor and you come straight into our kind of front desk. And this is a picture of our front desk with some of our venue crew there. So this is actually a picture from Halloween. Normally the crew don't dress up in video game outfits, unfortunately. But we do have our Tom there, who has got his nice little Mario hat on. We have Kitty, who is dressed as Bowser, and then we have a Yoshi in the back with Imogen as well. These are our core venue team, and we have a bunch of different crew as well that kind of help people around. So they are dressed, like I said, as video game characters now. Normally, they've got these big blue t-shirts on that say NVM on them. Essentially, what the crew do is they walk around the museum. As well as serving you your tickets at the start, they'll walk around the museum and they will chat to you and they'll see how it's going, and they'll be able to explain about kind of some of our curatorial philosophy or what this game is, give you a bit of background about this game, or learn to help you play this game as well. And that's kind of what the crew do. They're a brilliant, brilliant team, and just kind of make the whole visit really, 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 really good. So once you've bought your ticket, you will then be able to make your way into the museum proper. And the museum proper will look a little bit like this. So this is a kind of quick view of that you get as soon as you walk into the museum. And as you can see, there are a lot of lights and a lot of kind of screens, and if you can't hear it at the moment, but normally the first thing you'll be able to notice is that it's very loud. And that's because we're a video game museum, right? So we have to have all these kind of TV screens, and we have to have them all on because the sound is such an important part of video games. So the first thing you'll notice when you walk into a museum is this kind of onslaught sound. But it's brilliant. It's brilliant. There's so many brilliant, fantastic kind of music tracks going on. So and you will see in the museum, and the way we've kind of structured it is there's lots of different kind of collections of games that are kind of scattered around the room, right? And they're kind of spaced in between each other, and they're all put together back to back, like whether it's 3 or 4 or even 5 or maybe just 2 kind of games put together. And these are what we coin bundles. These are game bundles, and the bundle philosophy kind of gets to the core of what we do when we curate video games. Essentially, we kind of group video games together based on a kind of theme or a concept, because we know that video games are so multiplicitous and fantastic, and there's so many brilliant different genres that you can have, right? So we want to kind of showcase that and share that. I think a lot of people kind of come to the museum and they think, oh, I just want to kind of start at the 1970s and I want to learn about the Magnavox Odyssey, and then I want to go all the way up to PlayStation 5, right? And that kind of just kind of going through that timeline. And we looked at that, and that's important. It's nice to kind of see how the technology is developed. But video games can be kind of so much more than that, and the art of video games is timeless. And what we want to do, saving video games for everyone forever, right, means that kind of all video games can be live and all video games are relevant. So we've kind of slightly resisted this idea of a strict chronology, instead picking apart kind of game concepts and game ideas that we then can start sharing games around, right? So, for example, this one right here that you see straight in front of the picture, just up there, with Super Hexagon in, Terry Kavanagh's Super Hexagon, and also Bennett Foddy's QWOP. There's also Super Trap Adventure on the back, and I think Switch and Shoot. These are games that are in our Tough Bundle, which is a collection of games that are really hard and explore this concept of difficulty in video games, and how some video games are really, really difficult and they're hyper difficult. Like you last 2 seconds and that's it. Like you're dead, right? So that's kind of what that bundle kind of explores. But other bundles we might have are ones like this one here, which is the Mario and Sonic bundle, which is probably a bit more traditional. It kind of actually explores this rivalry between the two mascots, right? So you've got Nintendo's Mario and you've got Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog. And around the 90s, they were kind of big rivals. It was kind of, you played as one or the other. So what we've got is we've got a selection of Mario games across history and a selection of Sonic games across history, back to back, and you kind of be able to kind of contrast and compare those. So first thing you can see is a couple of little boys there playing on Super Mario Bros. For the NES, and on the back of that I think is a Mega Drive set up with Sonic the Hedgehog 1. And then both kind of Sonic and Mario went to the 3D platformer era, right, with the Nintendo 64 and Sonic Adventure for the Dreamcast, or I think we've got Sonic Adventure 2 for the GameCube, the DX version on the back there. And then, funnily enough, they actually both, despite dabbling in 3D, both end up going back to 2D as well with new Super Mario Bros. Wii U and Sonic Mania, both kind of really great games. Okay, what was your first console? Well, Elmo, my first console was the Master System, the Sega Master System, which I loved. And I remember having Sonic on that as well. That came out, I think it came out at the same time. And the Master System version, looking back on it, was nowhere near as good as the Mega Drive version. But I loved it and I thought it was brilliant. Okay, so this is kind of one bundle here. I've got my mouse cursor on the screen. But the other bundles we have in the museum are all about kind of different things. So one of the bundles we might have is called the You Are Here bundle, which is a collection of video games that are made in Sheffield. Right, so we're a video game museum in Sheffield, and we're proud of being in Sheffield. And we want to kind of share Sheffield's gaming history. So we've got a couple of games there that are from, like we've got Zool from Gremlin Graphics. And we've got Snake Pass from Sumo Digital, and kind of Gremlin Graphics and Infogrames, and then Sumo Digital are, kind of have a very same heritage, right? A same lineage. But then we've also got some kind of smaller games made in Sheffield, like Big Eiffel Core, so Matt Phillips. We've got his Tanglewood in there, which is this brilliant 2D platformer that was made for the Mega Drive but only released like 2 or 3 years ago. It's so beautiful. Or Bone Loaf's Gang Beasts. I'm sure you might have played Gang Beasts. It's kind of the worldwide phenomenon of this kind of wobbly wrestling game. So we showcase that, and Bone Loaf absolutely fantastic as well. Zool, yes, Zool. I loved Zool. I think Zool is fantastic. A brilliant little 2D platformer. And I thought it was great. It originally came out on the Amiga, but the best version was the SNES, I seem to remember as well. Sponsored by Chupa Chup. It was sponsored by Chupa Chup. The whole first world, I think the first 3 levels or something, you just like bouncing through licorice all sorts and with loads of Chupa Chup signs. I believe the reason behind that is because when Gremlin were making it, they ran out of money. Like totally ran out of money, could not finish the game. So they kind of appealed to people to help out, and Chupa Chup got in touch and said, yeah, like we'll give you the money to finish the game, but we kind of want a in-game sponsorship, and ended up having the whole first few levels. I played it on SNES, Tenchi. Yeah, you look back and there was a big kind of difference between the ports back then. I really like the SNES version. I think some people who played the Amiga version don't look on it as fondly. I don't know, Elmo. I don't know if you enjoyed Zool on the Amiga. But I thought it was a great game. So yes, that's kind of one bundle we have, which is a celebration of games made in Sheffield. Other bundles we might have are the Word Per Minute bundle, for example, which is all about games that use a keyboard to type, and you kind of control by typing on your keyboard, right? Or we might have the bonus bundle, which is a bundle of games that are all about bonus levels in games. So what we've done is we've actually been able to kind of set these games up, I think we're working on emulation, so that when you press a button, you can automatically kind of skip to the bonus level in a game, right? So we have Sonic the Hedgehog 1, for example. When you press the button, suddenly you're kind of doing the pinball level where you kind of bounces around, or Donkey Kong Country on the SNES where you got to play as the ostrich, or my personal favourite, which is Street Fighter 2, where you get to beat up a car. So yeah, so we have that. Tenchi, do you have text adventures? We do have text adventures. Yes, we have a whole text adventure bundle. I cannot remember what all the games are on that bundle off the top of my head. However, Spunky Spelunky is one of them, and it's brilliant. And I love Spunky Spelunky. I think that's a fantastic little text game that you might have played. Okay, so what else do we have? We have the special effects bundle. How could I forget the special effect bundle? So the bundles aren't just kind of about us kind of sharing what kind of games, or we might think are important, or games that are around this concept. We also work with partners to create bundles as well. So the special effects bundle is a collection of games that we've partnered up with Special Effects, the charity that kind of help people with disabilities play games. And we're able to showcase some of the controllers that they've worked with Xbox to make. So they worked with Xbox to make the adaptive controller. And using the adaptive controller, you can plug loads of different kind of inputs in and kind of basically kind of create loads of different fantastic little controllers. So we have FIFA 20 playing on there at the moment, but you only use kind of 2 buttons and an analog stick. Or we have Forza Horizon 4, which can be played entirely just with one hand and a joystick. And it's just fantastic to kind of see what Special Effect do and showcase their kind of their work and how they make video games available for everybody, no matter, regardless. So they're great. In total, with the kind of when you add all the different stations up on all of our different bundles, we have just over 100 playable stations that you can sit down and play a game on. There's probably a driving factor as to why our museum actually has an average stay time of 3 hours and 1 minute. So people stay on average over 3 hours in our museum, which is just kind of mind-boggling. But great, absolutely great. So, but the museum is not just about playing games. We're not just about coming in, paying your money, and then playing on the 100 different games that we've got out. That's super important. Having kind of playability within the museum is really important. If you want to showcase the history of games, they have to be playable, right? But, if you did just want to play games, you could technically just stay at home, right? And play them at home. So what we have as well is also a big collection of video game objects and ephemera and memorabilia and artifacts and, lots of different kind of playthings, we call them, which are a selection of kind of video game objects or objects that make up video game culture and are really important, So here's an example of our playthings that are all about handheld gaming and handheld gaming history. So we have a couple there. We have obviously our Game & Watches, which are kind of some of the first ever kind of handheld kind of devices that you play games on. The D-pad was obviously really important. It was kind of invented by Gunpei Yokoi back for the Game & Watch. But we've got some kind of Game Boys with the Game Boy camera and a few Game Boy tapes roll as well. Oh, I'm going to take my son when everything is open again. As a 36-year-old who started on the Atari and Spectrum, I want to show him the history I've gone through. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's fantastic. There's a big kind of, there's so much nostalgia when you go in the museum and you get to see everything. What you won't get to see is loading a game up on the Atari or the Spectrum, or taking forever to kind of get a game working, or swapping out floppy disks and then it breaking. Fortunately, all our games work straight away. So if you did want to show him that kind of the pain of that, you won't be able to. So the other kind of handheld gaming things we've got a Barcode Battler, we've got a little Astro Wars down there, we've got a Game Child, bunch of different stuff, and there's a bunch of different kind of things you can read. I can't read because they're too small on my screen, but we'll move on to the next cabinet. This cabinet here is another example of what stuff we do. This is a cabinet all about the culture wars, right, of the 90s, which were kind of exemplified by Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2, or Nintendo, or Sega. Were you a Master System / Mega Drive player, or were you a SNES player? Were you a Street Fighter 2 player, or were you a Mortal Kombat player? Which one? Which one were you? Do make sure you let me know in the comments. I personally, my first system was the Master System, but I think my SNES is my favourite console. Controversial. Put the cassette in, load the game with a 56k dial-up noise, go have your dinner, come back and it's just about loaded. If you're lucky, Elmo. If you're lucky. Sorry, I was reading the comments there. Okay, so another thing we have in our kind of cabinets, we do, like I said, I mentioned earlier that we have a bunch of old video game artifact stuff, right? So we have this object here, and we have a cabinet dedicated to this. So this is the Magnavox Odyssey, which is the first ever video game console. I believe it was made in 1972. Oh, so you know, everyone's piling in on the console battles now. As a Nintendo was always a Sega kid. I was always Sega. The Master System was my first console, but the Mega Drive really started my life as a gamer. I think I'm the same. I'll go with that smelly cat. I agree. I too. This Master System was my first, and the Mega Drive kind of totally blew it open to me. We were a Nintendo household back then, Tenshi. See, look, you were a Nintendo household. You've got your barriers up. You are definitely part of that clan. Fortunately, looking back on it, we can play both of them now. But at the time, definitely, you know, it was probably an artifact from the old Spectrum or C64 wars as well. Let's not forget, you know, you were either one of those on the playground as well. So yeah, so the Magnavox Odyssey. This is the first ever video game console, made in 1972, and is a fascinating object due to how innovative I think it is. So the way this console worked, all it could display on a screen was, I think, one white line and maybe 2 or 3 white dots at any one time, right? So that's all it could really do, which isn't that exciting to look at. And, you know, the creator, Ralph Baer, he knew that wasn't that exciting to look at. So he packaged this box, and you can see this kind of huge box in the back, just at the top left there. He packaged it with so much stuff. So you don't just get the kind of console and the different kind of games that you could play on it. You also get these overlays, right? And these are kind of TV screen shaped overlays. That what you'd do is you'd stick them on your TV screen, and they'd stick there using the kind of static electricity. So you just kind of lay them on. The static electricity would cling this kind of this overlay onto its TV screen. And then when you've got your white line or your white dots going in the background, they suddenly make a lot more sense and they're a lot more colourful. So take this roulette example here. You'd essentially stick the roulette on the front of your TV, and then a white dot would go around in a circle, and you could then start to have like a home casino. And actually, he packaged it full with we had fake money in there and everything, so you could have your own casino at home just by buying this one Magnavox Odyssey. It's great. So I love that console. Fun fact about that console is that it actually comes with a few games installed on it. One of them was a tennis game that essentially had kind of a ball going across, and you had 2 panels, right? And you had to kind of hit the ball past the other panel when you played as a 2-player. Very, very similar to Pong. Well, this actually came out before Pong. And the Atari engineers who kind of created Pong saw it and were inspired by it and said, that's great, let's make our own version. Ended up making Pong, which then kind of took the world by storm. Magnavox spotted this, noticed that Pong was a rip-off of their game from the Magnavox Odyssey, and actually sued Atari successfully and ended up taking the entire revenue of Pong for 1 year. So Pong, as fantastic it is actually a rip-off. Who knew? Other cabinets. I might need to kind of speed through these cabinets because actually the tour has gone on a bit longer than I'd hoped, and we do have an interview ahead. But this is a cabinet about all of our kind of rhythm games, and we have a bunch of kind of rhythm games at the museum. There's a few bits and bobs here, and a few kind of stories about those. We have a cabinet full of input devices and controllers for games here as well. So one interesting one to spot right here is the Super Scope right in the top left corner there. So that scope was designed for the SNES. And is signed by its creator, Masayuki Uemura, who was the head of the R&D 2 unit for Nintendo from, I think, the late 70s up until 2004. Just before kind of this whole situation all kind of kicked off, we were lucky enough to welcome Masayuki Uemura, back to the UK earlier this year. So we invited him to Sheffield. He came to Sheffield and gave a chat about his history in the games industry. And he is a fascinating fellow who essentially created, really kind of iconic video game consoles such as the Nintendo Entertainment System or the Famicom and the Super Famicom, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. He created these machines. He was the kind of lead designer on these machines. And he gave a talk at our museum, and what was absolutely fascinating is that he's a very humble person, and he essentially kind of spoke about how he created these objects, but that he had no idea why they were so successful. So, he created the Nintendo Entertainment System that took the world by storm and kind of revived the video game industry in the US, but he didn't really know, right, is there a link to the talk? Unfortunately, not yet, no. So we do, I think we had issues when we were videoing it, which meant that we were unable to kind of properly get all of the kind of the footage from there. There are a few photos from there, and we have his slides. We have audio recorded it though, and the plan was to transcribe it and then kind of publish it written down. But unfortunately, that's been put on hold at the moment as all this happens. But we do kind of have that audio somewhere. I can have a check. I can chase it up and I can see if I can find it. But unfortunately, we don't have a video for it at the moment. So essentially, Wemmer kind of came to Sheffield and talked about his kind of fantastic video game heritage, and now he's a researcher. He's a professor at Ritsumeikan University at Kyoto, and his job is all about his research is all about kind of trying to work out how this kind of video game industry kind of blew up and how it became so successful. Because what's brilliant is that even though he made it, he still doesn't really know. So. Another cabinet's here, a bunch of oddities at the museum, a bunch of kind of different video game artifacts and objects that we've collected over the years. There's a bunch of kind of obviously very kind of strange stuff here. And that's kind of what's kind of great about the museum. Our collection is full of lots of different bits. I spoke about Atari earlier, that we do have a copy of Atari ET that was dug up from the desert and that was infamously buried when it kind of nearly destroyed the US games industry. But I'm going to have to move on quite quickly. We have a cabinet here that is all about why we might need a video game museum, and that includes a bunch of broken controllers. So obviously we have 100 games playable in the museum. Each one of those games needs a controller, and controllers can break very quickly when you're having thousands of people play with them. So we have stacks and stacks of broken controls. We have a bunch of kind of development units here as well in the museum. This is in a section called The Lab, and it's all about kind of video game development. Or one very angry man. Yeah. If some heavy-handed angry man was just not having fun at the games, he could easily destroy all the buttons and all the analog sticks. It's always the analog sticks. So a bunch of kind of different kind of development units here. A really interesting one is this one here. So this is a PlayStation 2 tool unit. Which is this kind of huge development unit for a PlayStation 2. This one in particular is we sourced it from Free Radical, which was a kind of video game development studio that was based in Nottingham. This particular unit was used to develop Time Splitters, the original Time Splitters game for PlayStation 2. Fun fact about this one is that I did once take a picture of this one and posted it online as an absolute unit of a development machine, right? And not long after posting it, got a tweet back from someone who used to work at Free Radical, who inquired as to whether that was one of the objects that was stolen from the museum back when he worked at Free Radical. So fortunately, I found out that it wasn't one of the ones that he's stolen, but I didn't know at first, and I was quite panicked and thought we might have had stolen goods at the museum. We don't. We kind of sourced this one quite safely, don't worry. So outside of the kind of the objects that we have and the kind of games that we have a bunch of other interactive exhibits that are all about exploring video game culture, right? So the next one we're talking about is this big one here, which is called Platform 14. Platform 14 is probably the most overbearing kind of biggest thing inside our museum, and it is a collection of 14 different games, but they're all the same game. It's a collection of 14 different versions of the original Donkey Kong. So kind of Donkey Kong came out, Shigeru Miyamoto's Donkey Kong came out in 1983 in the arcades, took the world by storm, was super successful, and everybody wanted a piece of it for their own system, right? Everybody who had a system wanted a version of Donkey Kong on it. So they started porting it to all those different systems. So what we've done is we've taken a collection of all those different ports. There were lots and lots of them. We've narrowed it down to 14, and we have each one of the 14 playable in one long big row of TV screens. So we have the original arcade version, but then we also have the NES version. We'll also have the Atari 2600 version, or the Atari 7800 version, or the Game Boy version from 1996 that is totally different, but it's still Donkey Kong at heart. I think The TRS-80 version is my favourite. You might want to search that one out on YouTube. It is totally super low tech. It's just kind of, you only have white and black, and you could barely have enough kind of pixels on screen to make it a row going upwards. It's a fantastic kind of little exhibit. When you start to play all these games, even though they are so graphically different, and the sound's different, and the buttons might be different. For example, they all feel like Donkey Kong, which I think is a real testament to that game. That core kind of gameplay loop is so iconic and brilliant to play. So, finally, another kind of exhibit in our museum is this exhibit here, which is called In Play. So, In Play is a sociological study of video game players, and is part of our kind of mission to not just examine video games, the objects, but also examine the people that play them. So this exhibit is kind of situated on one kind of big pillar in the museum, and you start it by looking at a TV screen, and it gives you a QR code and asks you to fill out a survey. And the survey is all about how you relate to video game characters. So when you play as a video game character, do you kind of like do you feel like you can be in their shoes? Are there any kind of character traits that you feel like you relate to, or is it just that it's an avatar that you just can't? Is nothing like you whatsoever? And does that matter when you're playing the game? And there's a bunch of different questions around that, and they kind of live update whenever people kind of fill it in. The next day it'll kind of update, and we've got a bunch of different charts about how people feel like they might relate to characters, how they might relate to stories in video games, and how they feel like they are in the game whenever they are playing a game. Okay, so. That is kind of the end of this virtual tour for now. Hopefully I can kind of do a bit more about the stuff and talk about the stuff that I wasn't able to speak about in future episodes. But this is really only 1/3 of what we do at the museum. So alongside kind of the actual exhibit, we also have a strong kind of preservation arm. So, we're all about, we work with a subject specialist network that Iain will speak about hopefully in a few minutes. And also we have a big kind of educational element. So one thing we want to do is educate people about games, particularly kind of young people, particularly kind of schools around us, or if it's just kind of people coming into the museum on the weekend. But we'll come on to that in kind of future episodes. We've got a lot of time. Oh, thank you very much, Richard. Thank you, Tenshi. No problem. It was my pleasure giving you a tour. Next bit is going to be even more exciting. So we've actually got a presentation from Dr. James Newman about what a video game is and why it makes it difficult to preserve. So I'm going to get this playing in a minute, and in the background I am then going to set up for my interview with Iain Simons as well. Okay, and over to James.
Hello and welcome to this first in the series of National Video Game Museum Explainers. The idea of these explainers is to take you on a journey through some of the questions and issues surrounding doing game history, studying video games, and working with video games in museums. And here we're going to be talking about a really important question. What is a video game? Okay, so what is a video game? Well, that almost doesn't seem like a question worth asking, does it? Surely we can all agree on what a video game is. Perhaps something immediately popped into your head as soon as you heard the word video game. Perhaps it was a handheld gaming system like this Game Boy Micro, or a console that plugs into the TV in your living room or bedroom like this Mega Drive. Or maybe you were thinking about a game played on a mobile phone, or a game played on a mobile phone. Or maybe you were thinking about virtual reality. So there's lots and lots of different devices, lots of different ways to play video games. In fact, there have never been more platforms or devices on which we can play games. They seem to be all around us. And there have never been more people playing video games. But as we can see just by looking at the examples here, video games are really diverse. So agreeing on a definition of a video game that covers all of these different technologies, all of these different ways of playing, is surprisingly hard. And that's a big deal if you're involved in studying, collecting, preserving video games. You need to know what the scope of your collecting is. Okay, let's look at a few different ways in which we might try to define what we mean by a video game then. So maybe we could start by thinking about stories. Video games are all about stories and storytelling. That sounds like a good place to start. So video games are epic adventures with complex storylines. We might have games that take many tens or even hundreds of hours to play through in their entirety. We might have games that have a huge cast of interesting characters with detailed dialogue. We care about these characters. We want to know their backstories. We want to know what happens to them in the future. And that future might lead to some really dramatic plot twists with endings we never saw coming. In fact, there might be multiple endings depending on the choices we made in the game. So the story might be different the next time we play. So, epic stories with huge cast of characters, stories that branch off in different ways depending on how we play. All of those are really important qualities of video games. Well, but hang on a minute, they're really important qualities of some video games. What about a game like Tetris? Let's think about the story of Tetris. So why are those blocks falling from the sky? In fact, is there a sky? Where is this game set? And where do the blocks go when they disappear? Does anybody know? Does anybody care? The blocks just keep on falling from somewhere, and there's precious little time to start pondering why. And even if there was a backstory to Tetris, and a way to explain why the blocks are falling and from where, would that matter to us? Would it enhance our enjoyment of the game? Would knowing what the story was make us better at playing it? So Tetris is definitely a video game, just like The Last of Us. But in some ways it's easier to list the reasons why those two games are different than the ways in which they're similar. So maybe it's not all about stories and storytelling. Maybe our definition of video games needs to be based around a different approach. So perhaps it's all about control. Maybe video games are all about interactivity. And that seems less contentious. Surely that's precisely the thing that separates video games from other kinds of media like film or TV. Surely we can all agree that interactivity is central to video games. Mario jumps because we press the button on the control pad. It's us driving that racing car in Gran Turismo. It's us moving those Tetris blocks around, even if we don't know why they keep on falling. So we know how important interactivity and control are, and that's why there's so many different types of controller, to give us new experiences and new ways to control what's happening in the game. In fact, some game designers even play around with this. So if we take a game like Sonic the Hedgehog, for example, so Sonic is all about racing around as quickly as possible. But what happens when we stop controlling Sonic? So here comes Sonic. And if we put the controller down and stop pressing any buttons, Sonic turns round to face the player looking out of the screen and starts impatiently tapping his foot. It's as if Sonic's saying, come on, get on with it. This is a video game, you're supposed to be doing something. Sonic knows video games are all about play and interactivity and control. But hang on, what are we doing now? We're not playing Sonic. We're watching somebody else play Sonic. So what about spectating? Actually, come to think about it, a lot of people spend a lot of time watching other people playing video games. So online video sharing services like Twitch and YouTube have shown us that millions of people love to watch other people playing video games. Now, in fact, although Twitch and YouTube remind us of that, watching other people playing has always been at the heart of game culture. Leaning over somebody else's shoulder in an arcade was a way to see what was going on and enjoy the game, but it was also a way to learn new techniques from experts. And talking about experts, let's not forget esports. Huge global competitions, leagues and tournaments that we can take part in, and most importantly, that we can watch online or in a stadium. In fact, so popular is watching other people playing that lots of modern games and gaming systems have spectating modes built right into them. So maybe video games aren't only about interactivity and control. Again, maybe our definition has to be broader still. So let's try a different approach. So something even less controversial, perhaps. Maybe a video game is something that we play on a video game console. That sounds like a pretty straightforward statement. After all, if you want to watch a DVD, we use a DVD player. If you want to listen to CDs, we use a CD player. So if we want to play video games, we need a video game console. So what we use a video game console for, surely, that's video game play. A video game is something played on a video game console. Unless we play those games on a mobile phone, or a TV remote, or a touchscreen tablet, or in an arcade, or on an Amazon Alexa, or on Facebook. And of course, the games that we play on these different devices, in these different places, are different too. Some last for many hours, some for just a few minutes. Some we play alone, some we play together. Some are competitive, some are collaborative. Some are all about stories, and some are all about the feel of the controls. So you might end up thinking there's almost no way we can come up with a single definition of a video game that covers all of these possible technologies, ways of playing, places of play. And that's before we even think about the fact that video games don't stand still. It isn't just that games can be wildly different from one another. Even if we just take one game, it changes over time as new features are added. So Minecraft today is not the same as Minecraft a few months ago, or a year ago, or 2 years ago, because new features come and some features get taken away. So if we look through the change logs of Minecraft, we can see all sorts of new creatures, capabilities have been added to the game over time, and this is true of many games. So some games, like Fortnite here, are arranged as seasons, more like television. But unlike television, you can't just rewind and go back to season 1. Once it's gone forever. So perhaps the only thing we can really agree on is that there's no easy or single definition of a video game that covers all of the things that we understand video games to be. There are different controllers, different stories, different systems, different platforms. That's precisely what makes video games exciting. Just when you think you know what they are, something brand new comes along and reinvents the entire form. And that means museums need to work really hard to collect and preserve games. Because video games are always being reinvented, we need to keep developing new techniques to look after them, to preserve them, and to exhibit them for future generations. And you can find out more about the work we're doing to save video games at the NVM website and in future instalments of the NVM Explainer series.
Hello, welcome back to the live segment of the show, everyone. As I promised before Jimmy's kind of great little kind of lecture there, we now have Iain Simons on the phone, on the video phone. Hello, Iain. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Connor. How are you?
I'm quite good. I'm really good. Yeah? Not too bad. My voice is starting to go. I think I've been speaking too long. My tour was a bit too long, but yes, all good. All good.
It was very good. I was watching it. It was odd to see the building again after not having seen it for however long it is now, a couple of months, a year. I lost track of time.
Yeah, decades. So I may have given a brief introduction to you earlier on when I kind of first started the stream, but could you just kind of please restate kind of who you are and what it is you do?
I'm Iain. Iain Simons, and I work at the National Video Game Museum with you and the team there, trying to collect and preserve video game culture for everybody. That's what I do. And prior to that, I started a festival called Game City, and after that, the National Video Game Arcade in Nottingham, which became kind of where we are now. So the last sort of 15 or so, probably slightly more years, have been spent sort of skipping back and forth. I'm not delicate enough to skip, but kind of moving back and forwards between video games and culture and the sort of kind of cultural life more broadly, and seeing what happens when they bump together.
When they bump together, interesting way of putting it. I know. So you said about Game City and about kind of that's kind of you started off doing that back in 2006. I think was the first Game City. Is that right?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
So Game City was obviously this big festival in Nottingham that was all about video games and game culture, right? But where did the idea for something like that come from originally?
Well, so I'm not. I played games as a kid. So I was the Commodore 64, VIC-20 Commodore 64 era, which I'm sure you will have read about in history books or at the museum. So that was that was the era that I grew up with. So kind of home computers and hobbyist computing and that sort of stuff. But I drifted out of games really and got involved in music and theatre, and that was what I went to art school. So I'm not a kind of video game. I don't think I'm a video game person first and foremost. The thing that has always excited me is events that can kind of bring people together. So whether that's kind of theatre or festivals or music or things that can create like an exciting experience that everybody comes together with. And I kind of worked in music and in theatre for a number of years after graduating, and then kind of drifted back into video games a bit. And the reason that I did was it was around the time of kind of quite early VR. So this is before Second Life. This is stuff like Active Worlds and all the things of trying to work out how to get two avatars to carry a ladder and together and all that kind of really early stuff. And I was sort of on the periphery of universities at that point. And it didn't look very good, and it would break all the time, and it wasn't very reliable. And just adjacent to this, that was this world that no one was ever talking about, was this incredibly robust, like multi-user, three-dimensional space that could be altered by players, called Doom, right? And then subsequently Quake. These like rock solid, fast, creative, interesting sort of 3D worlds that were sort of pioneering a whole load of different ways that were just kind of far more interesting and frankly kind of far more consumed than a lot of that kind of VR stuff people playing around at the time. So I thought, this is interesting but sort of weird that the sort of Doom culture, if you can get past the chainsaws and the shotguns, which admittedly can be a barrier, what you're looking at is a world that's really, really compelling and really kind of accessible, and that sort of got me back interested in video games really, and how they were made, and particularly who was making them. One of the things that changed in between me being a kid and I guess the sort of PlayStation era or the kind of console era was this sense of games being made by people. It's the thing we talked about loads in the festival and in the museum. And when I was a kid, you would buy, like I would wait and excitedly for the new Jeff Minter game to come out. So Jeff's still making games now, and there was this sense of games that had somebody's like kind of signature on them. So literally their name would be on the box, but also they'd have this sort of character, and this presence of it being kind of made by somebody in a kind of way that you totally take for granted. Like if we were talking about an album, right, or a book or something like that, like of course you would know who made the album or who wrote the book. You take that for granted. But with games, once the kind of console cycle kind of got embedded, all that kind of home sort of hobbyist movement sort of was diluted a bit. It wasn't the case, and for me that was weird, right? Coming back into games since the kind of early 80s and seeing how sort of anonymous almost they become, that seemed really weird to somebody who was sort of came out of the arts sector of it. So I thought, well, this we should try and do a project but before the festival actually I kind of thought it would be interesting to write about games, but acknowledging and talking about the people that make them, because that's really, really important. And then try and make a festival that was about the fact that games were made by people. So actually getting developers to come and talk to the public and explain, kind of how and why and where and who was involved in making these things. So I started writing about games for unusual sort of places. So I pitched like New Statesman and places like that to write video game columns for them, which really surprised me that they said yes. And then spent a few years going to games events. So going to E3 and being kind of video game journalist, video games journalist person, and not really enjoying those places. I don't know if you've ever been to E3, but it's like it's the worst place in the world to play a video game. It's
the worst place
to play a video game. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly probably top 5 worst places, but certainly worst place to play a video game.
What makes it particularly bad to be able to play there then?
Well, so when you play a game at home, right, you're going to be sat down on your sofa or whatever, and you can concentrate on the thing that you're doing, and it's kind of comfortable, right? For some reason, the games industry sort of settled on this model of getting, the biggest possible convention center that it could find, removing all the walls, putting as many games as possible next to each other that they could find, with kind of competing, kind of sculptures and installations and promo things next to each other. And guess what? It's really hard to hear what's going on. You can't understand what's happening, right? Because you walk up to it and you were playing the game before me, so it's halfway through it and it needs resetting, and it just becomes a really, really difficult place to actually encounter and discover games. So I thought, maybe it'd be interesting to try and find an alternative model, a different way of talking about games and experiencing games to people that wasn't just about putting them in front of a kind of sampling unit. So Game City, when that came about after a book, I did a book with James Newman, who just did the presentation. So I met Jimmy in 2003, I think. So I emailed him because I didn't understand one of his essays that he'd written. So around the time I was getting interested in games, and he was kind enough to tell me what the word meant, what ergodic meant, and we've collaborated on everything really that I've done ever since. Jimmy and I did a book, which was this, I think, with difficult questions about video games, and that is what the title says it is. Really, it's a bunch of really, really childish questions that we asked to lots of developers and gamers around the world. So, and it was like Eugene Jarvis, so the list now, and Jeff Minter and Ian Livingstone and Jess Sand and Demis Hassabis and Warren Spector, and these sort of amazing people that we ask these really, really childishly simple questions to, like, what's a video game? How can you tell if a game is rubbish? What makes a game good value for money? Like, seemingly really, really simple questions, but are actually kind of hard to answer if you think about them. And people responded to it really well, because they didn't tend to get asked that sort of stuff, at that time. And I suppose that sort of suggested that there might be a space for a kind of live version of that, where we would get developers in front of the public and they would talk about their work. So we did a show. I pitched an idea for like a kind of prototype Game City. It wasn't called Game City, at the South Bank at National Film Theatre, as it was then. We did that in 2005. That went really well. So that kind of gave me confidence to pitch the idea of Game City, which we ended up launching in Nottingham in 2006. That was a really long answer, sorry.
Oh, that was a fantastic answer. Like, kind of all my follow-up questions have now been answered.
Oh, really? Shall I go?
No, I mean, that's great. It kind of, it doesn't just, I think you focus on the people behind video games is still kind of so strong now when you look at the kind of the stuff doing at the NVM. I do have kind of a couple of questions around it, because, it was 2006 was the first kind of Game City, and I think your book, you said it was 2004. Is that right?
The book was the end of 2004. Then we did the South Park thing in 2005, and then 2006 was the first Game City. So we had like Lorne Lanning came over for that, which was brilliant and surprising.
It seems like, I mean, that is not really that long ago, right? I mean, it was what, 15 years or so.
That is very kind of you to say, but
But
it seems, in video game terms, it seems like quite a long time ago. It's weird because at the end of the first book, there's this whole thing about what people are looking forward to, and everybody's going, "Oh, can't wait for Half-Life 2 to come out," and Xbox 2, and all these things. And all this time later, we're still waiting for Half-Life 3. But if in video game years, it feels like it's like dog years, isn't it? It feels like quite a long time.
And with the kind of how much it has changed and how much games kind of culture has kind of I don't want to use the word blown up. No, maybe that is the right word.
It's too late now.
But what for you has been kind of the biggest kind of development in game culture in the last 15 years? Do you think?
I think for me it's this kind of really obvious answer, but it's still the thing that's most exciting. Is that I think in the last, and I've lost track of time now, so this won't be the right number of years, but around 3 or 4, 5 years into Game City, so around 2009, 10, the indie game movement. Or the indie game. It's not really that sense of a movement, but that the possibility for smaller teams to make different kinds of games for different kinds of audiences and actually make a living out of it became real again. And that's partially because of the App Store, and partially because of of Steam and that whole kind of infrastructure starting to go into place. And suddenly you started to see, and increasingly still now, this kind of cultural confidence, games kind of getting this confidence back that I really remembered from the early 80s, right? When Jeff Crammond and these people were making these just amazing, weird, surprising things, and it felt like suddenly you could be surprised by video games again. It had been quite a long time since I've been surprised, and that's why I want that in everything, and definitely in games. So for me, it's that really exciting possibility again now that new and different voices are making different sorts of work.
One thing I did kind of want to grill you on, I've been wanting to grill you on for a while actually, is around this idea of surprise, an idea that kind of you can do anything. I think it was back in 2010, so I think you were gearing up for the 5th Game City, and you developed quite a close friendship with the Katamari Damacy and Watam creator Keita Takahashi, and this led quite infamously to Takahashi proposing building a kids' playground in Nottingham.
Well,
is this
what happened was, so I met Keita. I met Keita probably at GDC or something. I'm not 100% sure where I met him. He came to Game City 2 and showed a prototype of Nobby Nobby Boy for the first time. So that was 2007, and we got along quite well. And I'd read in interviews that he'd done about Katamari in the previous year, because he's a fine art sculptor guy. He's sort of tangentially in happens to be involved in video games, but he I think he would say that he's not a games person. And he'd mentioned in an offhand comment in some interview with BBC News or something that what he'd really like to do is build a kids playground. And I'd kind of read this and thought, that's what a great thing to kind of want to do. It would just be such a fantastic thing to have done. And how hard can it be, right? So it's quite hard. So I emailed him in between Game City 2 and 3, actually, I think it was. I kind of got in touch with Namco, because he was still at Namco at that point, and said, look, I'll try and get Nottingham to give us the land. And we'll get Keita over and do a kind of residency and do some designs, and work out if this is in any way kind of feasible or interesting or not, and see what we can come up with, and then raise the money and then build a playground, because it's everybody wants to build a playground, right? And he was brilliant. He came over and he lived he was at the Ibis Farm. He lived with us for a bit of it, and he was sort of hidden in this little cottage in Woodthorpe Park, just over there, doing sort of designs. And we presented these prototype designs to kind of local school kids. And then at the opening of the festival, we kind of revealed that he's been in town for the last month, and we're going to try and build this playground, and these are the designs. and then a number of things happened. Some of them sort of local politics and that sort of stuff. And the biggest problem was that the global financial crash hit, and it was not the right time to be saying we want to build the world's most radical and exciting and probably dangerous playground in the world. So sadly, the project kind of ended at that point. I think they exhibited some of his designs for it at Now Play This, and I think maybe not Baby Castles, but they exhibit some of them in LA as well. But they were brilliant. Just these, just amazing. Kind of pieces of design that he did, and it was just a lovely. He's a lovely person, and it was a lovely experience to try and do something, like that.
Are you still kind of friends with Cater now? Someone just put in the comments that they think it seemed like from interviews that Cater was a bit disillusioned with video games after working with Namco, because they just wanted more and more sequels to Katamari, which. Yeah,
I mean, Cater would. I think whether it was Namco or anybody, Cater's an artist, right? So ultimately, he wants to be self-employed, and he would say, "Freelance. I want to be freelance." That's what he wants to be. And every now and again, I think his sensibility aligns really well with another, big sort of corporate body, like as he did with Namco, with the work he did there. But he's just started up his own thing again now, kind of post Wattam. I saw it actually when we went out to Ritzmaiken. He was at Bit Summit last year. I'm not sure. He's making a game for the Playdate, Panic's handheld console. So he showed us that. But yeah, he's all right. I mean, he started his family. I think we just had Tom, and he just. A couple of years after that, he kind of had just started a family as well, so all that sort of stuff kind of changes, and priorities change with that sort of stuff. But yeah, he's excellent. He's an excellent person.
Nice, awesome. Another thing I wanted to kind of ask you on was that back in I think it was 2008, you were instrumental in setting up the UK's first national video game archive, along with was it Bradford Science and Media Museum and Nottingham Trent University?
Yeah.
So where did that come from?
Say again.
How did that come about?
Well, it was burgeoning interest in Jimmy and I did a book for the BFI, and one of the things that struck us whilst doing the book for the BFI was how hard it is to get hold of objects, anything, or any kind of centralized sort of repository that wasn't sort of illegal ROM sets. So James and I and a guy called Tom Woolley, who used to be at the museum in Bradford, isn't anymore, again sort of pitched to the National Media Museum. It wasn't called that then. It was called, or maybe it was called that. It's changed again since. But anyway, the Bradford Media Museum, that they should start collecting. We should start preserving video games because they're disappearing. Because they're kind of under threat, because they're misunderstood, because of all those sorts of things. So we made a collections document for them as part of their new media collection. For this is a science museum group, really, to begin collecting video games formally. What happened then, guess what, was the coalition government got in. Again, this is, just as like austerity was starting. So we had a kind of flurry of doing some collecting, and then that kind of ended because... well, not kind of ended, but it became not a priority. Lots of people made redundant from the Science Museum Group and the sector as a whole, and in more spectacular bad timing. It was kind of it never kind of formally ended, but was never also really pushed forwards by those museums then, quite understandably, because they're kind of trying to manage everything else across the whole group. But that was the first formal acknowledgement, I think, in the UK that we might need to start to take this stuff seriously, and that maybe video games have a importance beyond just being worth loads to the kind of GDP.
And you said that they're kind of they're at risk, right? They're at the surface level, it seems like video games should be relatively easy thing to archive, because they're primarily digital products, and digital products can be copied ad infinitum, right, and distributed remotely. So when we talk about kind of games history being at risk, how exactly is that the case?
Well, the risk of contradicting you, it is almost the opposite of what you're describing.
I know it's the opposite.
You're setting me up to answer it. Help it. So the thing about the games industry is the whole thing, the whole beast is sort of set up to kind of eat itself every few years, right? So both in terms of technology, in terms of the kind of marketing around it, in terms of kind of games culture as a whole. GTA 4 comes out. That's great. GTA 4 is amazing. It's great, and it makes all this money. But immediately, we're then asked to think about GTA 5. So, like, baked into the way that we think about video games is this, this idea that the next thing is always the best thing, and that's kind of unique to other art forms. So, when the Beatles make Abbey Road, right, we don't all immediately throw away Sergeant Pepper because it's like obsolete. Do you know what I mean? There's a sense of a sort of continuum, or somebody writes the 6th Harry Potter book, we don't throw away the 5th Harry Potter book or kind of think it's kind of less in some way. And sort of baked into the whole idea, like culturally, video games is this thing of them just as eating themselves. So that's the problem. You've also got legion technological problems. Okay, so there's the actual platforms themselves, this whole idea of backwards compatibility. So games on a PlayStation from a PlayStation 1 may or may not run on a PlayStation 3, depending on what version of PlayStation 3 you've got, and kind of so on. So that makes the whole project of kind of digital archiving, as you say, really, really difficult. The legalities around capturing video games and capturing kind of bit streams of code are really, really difficult to negotiate. And then of course now you're into like, well, which version would you capture anyway? So I saw in Jimmy's video, like how would you that's not even start as difficult as Minecraft. Think about like Angry Birds, right? You're going to preserve Angry Birds. You could get the code of Angry Birds from Rovio, but which version? Like which patch of Angry Birds should we actually preserve? Because there's a lot of them, right? Before we even begin to think about things like Minecraft and stuff that is so sort of unstable and complicated, they become really, really awkward, and which is the thing that I like about them. Awkward and difficult and interesting things to start to try and kind of find the edges of. So yeah, they're incredibly difficult, and I guess our approach increasingly has been less about digital preservation and getting bit streams and storing code, and actually trying to capture what games mean, and capture the kind of playing of games and what they mean at this moment in time. So the game Jet Set Willy, a game that I was used as an example, but Jet Set Willy, a game that I used to play in 1984 at home, means something really, really different now to you playing an emulated version of Jet Set Willy on a Commodore 64 emulator on your iMac, right? Because I'd been playing it at home, and there's probably only going to be one television in our house, unless you were like pretty rich. You probably only had one telly in the early 80s, in the UK, and as a consequence of that, you've probably been playing it with other people because your family had been around trying to get Jet Set Willy off the telly so that they can watch Swap Shop or some other early 80s TV reference, the A-Team. So what games kind of meant and how they were consumed was really, really different then. And that experience, like, that's as much a part of the story of games and why they are what they are, and the story of what they mean to people's lives, as actually the kind of code itself. So we've started to concentrate more on that kind of documentary and that that sort of approach, because it's like, not least because it's possible. You don't need armies of lawyers in quite the same way to be able to capture that that stuff. And there's lots of people working on lots of different approaches, but that's the area I think that we're kind of most interested and most able to begin to make a contribution.
Awesome. So, if if someone is kind of sat at home on the stream and kind of looking over at their collection in the corner and thinking, you know, I've got a bunch of stuff. I've got a bunch of games, consoles, memorabilia, stuff. What are the best steps that they might be able to take if they want to preserve it, maybe for the next generation, or maybe for even thinking even further ahead?
I guess it's thinking about what they want to preserve. So on one hand, you might say, well, keep a diary, like write down how excited you are about Half-Life 3 coming out. Write down what it's like, you know, or you know, or kind of record, or make a podcast, or actually, you know, make a Let's Play video. Like this is the history of games is kind of being written more than ever before at the moment through streaming. So, you know, like seeing people playing games and how they play games and what they think about games is actually being captured now in a way that it never has. So I think the sort of obvious answer really is document it, you know, and that doesn't mean let's plays and you know and game facts and those kinds of things are really valuable accounts, you know, of what games mean and how they're played. Preservation doesn't need to be this necessarily like a forensic kind of legal thing. It's about, for us and for me, it's about capturing the stories of what these things mean. That's really the most important thing.
Ace. Awesome. So I got one more question, if you don't mind asking. And it's actually it's kind of less about the past and documenting the past, but more actually probably about the future, because one of the big kind of pushes for the museum is in education. And you know how kind of it's running schools it's running workshops for schools and workshops for visitors, and a lot of our kind of online stuff as well. I know Leah is also kind of alongside this stream here. We've also got our educational officer. Leah is doing 2 weekly streams all about kind of educational stuff about young people getting into games, etc. And there are a lot of video games that are being used for education. So, you know, from Minecraft is used in kind of classrooms. Assassin's Creed has its kind of its museum section to it. But can children learn from all video games? Is there an argument to be made there?
From all video games?
Yeah.
I mean, not. I mean, like you could stretch that, I guess, to say that they kind of like each video game at the very least would teach you how to play that video game. I don't know that necessarily means that all video games are like as valuable, like they're not all kind of equal, and you would go to them for different things. So, like I think it's really important not to be defensive about this. I'm not suggesting you were, but that you know that sense of that. All of them are equally, you know, getting the same amount of nutrition, if you like, or kind of in a certain kind of a chase from every game. Like that's not true, and that's okay. It doesn't need to be, right? So you know, so I think games can be a fantastically useful, accessible tool as a way into thinking about some ideas for some people. But they're not a kind of magic bullet that will make everything accessible for everyone. And it's interesting when you sort of say Assassin's Creed and that sort of example, because I totally agree. So the richness of the a 3D model that you can walk around of ancient Rome or whatever the kind of environment might be, that is predicated on the assumption that when someone hands you a controller, you know what a controller is, right? And that's a bit, and the one thing that I've really learned from working at the museum, working on the festival, is that is a big assumption to make. That is a complicated thing, okay? So video games can make some things really, really accessible and bring them to life in ways that other forms really, really can't. But we've got to be really careful with, kind of leaning back into thinking that the problem's solved because the kind of visual fidelity is so amazing, or they sound or look a certain way. Because actually, some of the barriers to video games being accessible are like much, much, much simpler, and more fundamental than that. And I think it's easy to assume that all kids have computers, you know, or that everyone's on the internet, or everyone's got access to those sort of technologies. And we, you know, we can't and we shouldn't. They're a fantastically powerful tool, and we're just beginning, I think, to scratch the surface of what they're capable of educationally. But we need to be, as with everything, you know, as with all, you know, kind of forms, we just need to be really rigorous with how we treat them, as I think we are being.
Awesome, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Iain, for kind of spending
Thank
the
you.
evening chatting. That's great, and I'm happy I got to ask you a bunch of those questions that I've been meaning to ask you whenever we're in the office, but I keep forgetting.
And it took us it took a pandemic
yeah,
for you to feel that you can ask me about them. Well, I'm glad we did as well. Thank you very much for having me.
No problem. Thank you. Awesome. I shall speak to you later then.
Cheers, Connor.
See you
Thanks,
later,
everybody.
Thank you. Okay, so unfortunately, that means Iain is going to be gone there. Okay, and unfortunately, that is it from me too. I am going to be closing up this stream now. Just a kind of few things that I'd just like to kind of let you know before I finish the stream. We are going to be back the same time next week, 6 p.m. on Monday, the 27th of April, for another stream, another kind of bunch of things I'm going to chat about. We're going to have another thing, another kind of micro lecture from Jimmy, and hopefully another special guest as well. We've got a few special guests that we're talking to and hopefully lining up, so that should be cool. Keep an eye on our social channels, such as our Twitter and our Facebook, for any kind of information about that. We will also be doing other streams as well over on YouTube, but these are kind of Leah, our education officer, is doing a bunch of educational streams all about kind of teaching people how to kind of maybe make their first game or do video game adjacent stuff. So last week we learned how to make a pixel character and draw a video game pixel character and then animate it. That was brilliant. And also Leah played some of the Rabbids coding game as well. And there's going to be more stuff starting from tomorrow at 11 a.m. So keep an eye on our social channels again, and there'll be links to all of those videos there. Fantastic. Well, I shall see you all next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.
you